You're listening to the Fan2Fan Podcast, and on this episode, we continue talking about our comfort watch. That's right, we've been talking about movies that bring us comfort, that nice warm blanket, whether it's a movie or a TV show. And in this episode, we just happen to be focusing on the man, the myth, the legend, Doug McClure. Here we go. Welcome to the Fan2Fan Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Bernie Gonzalez. With me today, fellow co-host Pete Charbonneau. And
part two of this discussion, I think, starts with a character, a man, a legend, I dare say, Pete, that I think has starred in various movies, more than one that we have both watched. And this is the man, the legend that is Doug McClure. For those that are not familiar, may actually be more familiar with the Simpsons analog, Troy McClure, who was modeled after Doug McClure, voiced by Phil Hartman.
Hello, I'm Troy McClure. You may remember me from such movies as Cry Yuma and Here Comes the Coast Guard,
The Revenge of Abe Lincoln, and The Wackiest Covered Wagon in the West,
Buck Henderson, Union Buster, and Troy and Company's Summertime Smile Factory, Handle with Care, Today We Kill, Tomorrow We Die, and Gladys the Groovy Mule. Calling all Quakers.
Lead Paint, Delicious but Deadly, and Here Comes the Metric System,
Mothballing Your Battleship, and Dig Your Own. And Man vs. Nature, The Road to Victory.
Troy McClure, put him on screen, and he had the energy of a Doug McClure, who was in a show called The Virginian, which I have to say, unlike Maverick and Wild Wild West, was not a Western that I necessarily watched. But we're not talking about The Virginian. We're talking about the 70s movies, Pete, that I've seen in your feed recently that star the great Doug McClure.
I feel like Doug McClure walked so Reb Brown could run. And if you get that reference, then you're up our alley. Blast McHard cheese.
American International presents The Land That Time Forgot, an astounding motion picture based on the book by Edgar Rice Burroughs, creator of Tarzan and the most thrilling science fiction stories ever written. Travel through an underwater passage and discover an awesome prehistoric world. Fight for your life against the terrifying creatures of a lost continent. Come face to face with primitive man and learn the secret of evolution. The Land That Time Forgot.
Mr. Tyler!
Starring Doug McClure.
There's a secret to this island. Something that we haven't been able to fathom yet. And whether we stay or get away may depend on it.
It's action, danger, and adventure on an epic scale.
How much longer do we give them?
We're not leaving without them! Forget Skipper!
You will never forget Edgar Rice Burroughs' The Land That Time Forgot.
All right, so let's start it off. 1974, Land That Time Forgot, Pete. I know this has to be on your list.
Oh yeah. This is up there for me. This is one of the big ones for me.
And it's kind of in that trio, right? With like At the Earth's Core and The People That Time Forgot.
Yeah, and for those that are not familiar with these movies, A Land That Time Forgot and The People That Time Forgot is a direct sequel. And then At the Earth's Core is completely separate from those two, but they were all done by, I want to say that it was like Amicus Pictures, and they were kind of like a B-level Hammer company that I want to say those are like the last three movies that they did, but they had that Hammer feel to them, even from like the titles to, they did like this whole run of like adapting like Edgar Rice Burroughs material. I think one of the amazing, fun, cheesy things about this is that you've got Doug McClure, who's like, just like this slab of beef on screen. He's acting up against, I would say, very capable British character actors, and the dynamic between the two, like Peter Cushing is in At the Earth's Core, and he's kind of played for comic relief But I mean, he's fantastic in it. Caroline Munro's in that one. I want to say Sarah Douglas, who played Ursa in Superman 2, is in The People That Time Forgot, along with John Wayne's son. Yeah, The Land That Time Forgot was the one that I always would go back to, because that's the one that I recall, like you, that I saw most, I think, when I was a kid, and just pure escapism. Just
absolutely,
there's dinosaurs. There's like this land under the ice that they stumble upon. So a lot of these movies, like, they took their time to build up to like the big reveal. And say what you will about how good or bad the giant monsters or creatures might be in these movies, they built up to it. And so, like, you've got like this, certainly with the Land That Time Forgot, it starts out with like a German U-boat is like attacking shipping during World War I. And so Doug McClure and a couple of survivors kind of take control of the submarine, but then there's like a back and forth. And I'd say like the first 30 or 40 minutes is just them at sea. Yes. And finally, like the Germans sabotage the compass, and so they're forced to kind of just head south, and then they come across this this frozen land called what's it,
Caprona.
Caprona.
I say it that way because that's the way the German U-boat captain said it, Caprona, and it was just like, Caprona. Whoa, okay, like this sounds exotic and cool and ancient and primeval. I'm in for this. Yes, right. Absolutely. After watching them fight for 30, 40 minutes on the U-boat for control, and all of a sudden now they're in like the Land That Time Forgot with dinosaurs. Yeah. I'm in. And the thing about this movie is it rewards you with not like one dinosaur like Beast of Hollow Mountain, where it's like, hey, you get a dinosaur in the last like 5 minutes. No, this you get dinosaurs and they get shot and they eat. You get like Neanderthals. You get it all.
Yeah, and it's so cheesy, but it's so much fun. There's just like that adventure of, okay, so they're there, and none of this is, deep sci-fi. It's really, like, again, this is pure escapism. Doug McClure is just hamming it up.
Yes.
The entire time. You know what you're getting. The juxtaposition between him and like these very accomplished British character actors that are like really trying to sell their parts, and Doug McClure is just kind of, bull in a china shopping his way through, all the scenery chewing. It's just great. It's just great. And, they have to, of course, learn to survive and live together in this, in this wild land that they've discovered. And, how are they going to make their way back? Can they make their way back? And, as they go further and further into the land, I'm now maybe getting mixed up with the sequel, but like, there's like all this like weird evolution going on, or de-evolution. And
yes.
And there's a volcano, because there's always a volcano ready to blow up at a moment's notice, because you need your Deus Ex Machina.
That's right. And don't forget the dinosaurs taste like chicken, because there's the part where the chef, I think it's the British chef, because now you have Troy McClure is like the square-jawed, a monolith of like American bravado in this movie.
Yeah. Oh, totally.
You throw him in with like the British, who are being proper but also at war. And yeah, I mean, talk about Deus Ex Machina, because then you get like Doug McClure, who's like, oh, my pappy used to make these boats back in California. It's like, what are the odds that your dad made boats like this that would give you the knowledge to take over this U-boat? But you know what? You're Doug McClure. I'm going to go with it. The other part about that movie, and I don't know if you remember, was also when they got there, that idea that like they had to kind of put their past and their alliances behind them.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was always kind of neat. They were able to escape to Caprona, but there's no Axis and allies anymore. It's like, hey, now it's survival, outside of some small infighting. I think that was also one of the things that I enjoyed about that movie. I want to be on that island with them, kind of like in the same ways like with Land of the Lost. Put us on that raft, because I want to go to the Land of the Lost as well.
Yeah. And again, like this was firing my imagination. Like if I wasn't playing it in the woods across the street, I was certainly thinking about how I would have survived in Caprona with these people. And I was always placing myself in like, this was like a world that was really just expanding my imagination. I'm like, I'm so on board for all of this. Like, I love the whole concept. My wild imagination would often daydream about in some kind of submarine that goes under the ice and then surfaces in a subtropical world somehow. It made no sense even back then, but there was still that like little nugget, because this was like the 70s and early 80s where, we just didn't have all the information at our fingertips all the time. In the back of your mind, like, well, maybe a place like this could exist, like maybe the Loch Ness Monster does exist. And I'm not dismissing any of that stuff today, but I'm saying like, our world seems to have grown smaller in the time since then, where then it still felt like all of this possibility was still out there. And what an amazingly rich world that Edgar Rice Burroughs, the basis for this came off of, provided like the template for this and so much of the other movies that I think are going to be on our lists. There was just so much there to chew on, and it all tasted like chicken, and it was all delicious.
Yes. And it tasted like the scenery that McClure was chewing for sure.
Ah, splendid, Elsie.
With the compliments of the chef, lady and gentlemen.
Miss Clayton?
Is plesiosaurus a common dish in the British Navy, Mr. Olson?
I know, ma'am. The chef confessed complete ignorance of how to cook such a beast. This is an old Irish recipe I dreamed up for the occasion. Bon appetit.
Excellent. Our time together, gentlemen, promises to be extremely interesting.
At the Earth's Core, Pete, I mean, that's another Doug McClure movie, except this time, if it wasn't enough that Peter Cushing is in it, you're also getting Carolyn Monroe and someone that grew up with like the women of Hammer, Hazel Court, Ingrid Pitt. I've seen the black and white Universal monsters, and those are amazing. But as like a prepubescent teen watching the Hammer films, their version of the Mummy, Curse of Frankenstein, the werewolf, the Gorgon, whoa, that not only is the blood Technicolor, but so are the boobs. And this is amazing. And you have my undivided attention. And at the Earth's Core, Carolyn Monroe, wow.
She's flat out gorgeous. She was in a bunch of Hammer films. She was in at least one of the Sinbad movies.
And again, more Edgar Rice Burroughs. There's something kind of, I think it kind of goes back to what you're talking about, that idea of exploring corners of our planet that seem to be, lost in time, the legends that are like the Bermuda Triangle. And in this case, you're literally going into the Earth's core with the cheesiest, most Victorian like tour guide in Peter Cushing, who's like the absent-minded professor.
Yeah, this isn't Van Helsing. Or Dr. Frankenstein. He's kind of bumbling his way through this one.
100%. Yeah. And his sidekick in Doug McClure. And I'm sure McClure would say he's sidekick to no one, but American bravado as they take their like steampunk drilling machine into the center of the earth.
Edgar Rice Burroughs, author of the Tarzan Adventures and The Land That Time Forgot, takes us beneath the world we know to probe the mysteries of inner space, to reveal the incredible secrets of a fantastic subterranean world at the Earth's core. Doug McClure faces the terrifying creatures of a fabulous underworld. Doug McClure, Peter Cushing, Carolyn Monroe, at the Earth's core.
No one can escape from the Mayhar city. The Mayhars are all-seeing. You have not really seen their power. They're evil.
Land That Time Forgot, which took about 30, 40 minutes to get onto the island. I think like after the really cool intro title scenes, McClure and Cushing getting into their drilling vessel thingy, they're in the Earth's core within like less than 5 minutes.
Yeah, they dispense with any buildup. Like they're already kind of like outstanding in front of like the drill, like that they're about to set foot in, and they do away with a lot of exposition. It's like we're about to embark on this great adventure, and they're off, and it's more time that you get to spend in this world beneath the Earth's core, and the more time you get to spend with Caroline Monroe, and then the warring factions.
That's right.
And you got like these, like Ugnaught looking creatures that are at the beck and call of these pterodactyl bird.
The Mahars.
Humanoid, the Mahars, yeah, whose eyes glow green, and they're able to kind of paralyze their victims so they can kind of swoop in and decapitate them.
That's right. And they look like they were right off the set of Land of the Lost.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
There was something charming about the character design, puppeteering of all those creatures.
Yeah, these totally could have been pets of the Sleestacks without question.
Absolutely. Yes.
Always great that this subterranean society all speak English, and there's really never any question.
Yes.
How do you all speak English? And
they even do that scene where they kind of do what, for lack of a better term, I'll make it into a verb. They seven samurai it, where they have Doug McClure train all of the tribes people on how to fight. And he's showing them like how to make spears and fight as a group. It's that kind of movie. And of course, Carolyn Monroe is going to fall in love with Doug McClure, as cheesy and egotistical as it'll be. Like, that's just the kind of movie it is. But again, if you're watching this on a Saturday afternoon, it gives you everything you want.
Oh, totally. And, and like you were saying, like the lesser of the three of this trio, People That Time Forgot, it's definitely watchable. It's got its moments, but it's definitely a lesser version of Land That Time Forgot.
See the people that time forgot. See the forbidden city of skulls, where they sacrifice prisoners to the volcano god. Edgar Rice Burroughs, The People That Time Forgot, rated PG.
Patrick Wayne, John Wayne's son, is tasked with trying to find Doug McClure from the last one, because at the end of Land That Time Forgot, Doug McClure and was it Susan? Or I can't remember he woos the British woman, and they decide to try and make their way in this world on their own.
And they have the moment too in the beginning where they kind of start it where it ends, where this guy's like on the shore and he finds a bottle, right? Yep. And it doesn't have, it has a message in it. And that's kind of how it ends, where that they've maybe made their way off this island that's not so much of an island after the volcano explosion, but now they're kind of trekking into the unexplored Arctic wilderness.
Right. Yeah. So there's like a whole kind of like rescue team that comes along that tries to find them. And this is the one with Sarah Douglas, who I know she's like taking photographs. I can't remember if she's like a journalist or not, but there's a half attempt to give her a little more agency than the women in these other movies. But in the end of the day, like once the monsters start coming, she's, again, is basically like damsel in distress, unfortunately.
And that one does the thing too, where those samurai warriors that capture McClure. So it's a little bit of a mishmash. And I think that's kind of the one charm about all these movies. You could have dinosaurs, samurais, and cavemen all living in like the same world, because it's perfectly fine. It makes sense.
Yeah. This was the one that had that quirky little thing where they figure out, like, the deeper they go into the island, evolution keeps kind of springing forward like every couple of miles. So they start off where they find like the primitive, like Neanderthal type people. And then by the end, they've got like the samurai society with like the head guy. That's like the main bad guy. And none of it really makes much sense, but it's not really supposed to. You're really just supposed to be along for the ride. And like I said, it's certainly a major step down from the other two movies, but it's still entertaining. Doug McClure kind of pulls like the Charlton Heston in Beneath the Planet of the Apes, where he's not in the movie until the final third, where they discover him still alive. His love interest has died off screen, and he's like, kind of like, life's still worth living, and like, we got to get you out of here. And he still has his cheesy heroic moments before, spoiler alert, he gets a couple of arrows into him.
I do remember at the end though, there was some of the explosions, the pyrotechnics were pretty impressive.
Yeah, I mean, again, like you were saying, like, this is not a big budget film, but there was care involved. Like, I can't remember if they were like men in monster suits, or if these were more like puppets. I want to say there were probably more puppetry involved. A lot of it is actors like, in the foreground with these, the monsters kind of projected on screen behind them. The effects don't hold up great, but again, like it looked like there was a lot of care taken, and I don't know who was in charge of the effects on this, but there was a lot of care taken in the creation of these things, because whereas Land That Time Forgot, you've got a lot of like straight like dinosaurs that would be recognizable in any children's dinosaur book. When you get to People That Time Forgot, you get some like more interesting looking creatures that are kind of like a cross between like mammals and reptiles. There's like, one thing looked like kind of like a hippopotamus, but not really. It's like, they were playing around with, some creativity. So I give them credit for that. Like they could have just kept going like that straight route of like, oh, here's another Tyrannosaurus fighting another Triceratops, but they were stretching their legs a little bit.
You stumble onto a good action adventure Doug McClure movie. Like you're in for a good like 90 some minutes. Like you're in a good spot, especially if it's a Saturday afternoon. But one that I haven't seen, that I've seen the poster for, and if you're listening to this, just Google image search the poster for Warlords of Atlantis.
Here is the greatest undersea adventure of all time. Warlords of Atlantis.
You cannot escape.
Oh, come on, jump!
Warlords of Atlantis, rated PG.
Octopus tentacles and creatures in the high seas. It just looks like a movie that we would have watched. Feels like it would have been the unofficial fourth installment in that Doug McClure trilogy.
It's one of the things I like about stumbling across those type films, because, we've been around long enough to have seen a lot of this stuff, and certainly have gone back to fill in a lot of the holes that we may have missed on the first time through. To know that there's still a film out there that is going to be in the same vein, it's almost like you're guaranteed to be entertained, because we already know we love those three. And this sounds like it's really just right in the same family. So, what's not going to be to love about it? But the fact that we haven't seen it is just one of those kind of like little treats of life, where here's one more to add that, I know that I love these and I've seen them countless times and I enjoy it every time. But now here's another one that's going to feel very familiar, but is completely brand new, even though that it came out in the early 70s.
You could almost hear Troy McClure saying, you may know me from such movies as At the Earth's Core, Land That Time Forgot, and I'm also in Warlords of Atlantis. And I would say, Troy, I would watch your movies 100%.
Troy, do you have a plan to get us out of this mess here in Atlantis? Plan? I don't need a plan.
The Erotic Adventures of Hercules, and Dial M for Murderousness, Alice's Adventures Through the Windshield Glass, and The Decapitation of Larry Leadfoot. P is for Psycho, and The President's Neck is Missing. Out with Gout 88, and let's save Tony Orlando's house. Smoke yourself thin and get confident, stupid. The Boat Jacking of Super Ship 79, and Hydro, the Man with the Hydraulic Arms. 2 minus 3 equals negative fun. And Firecrackers, the Silent Killer. Alien Nose Job, and 5 fabulous weeks of the Chevy Chase Show. Designated Drivers, the Life-Saving Nerds, and Phony Tornado Alarms Reduce Readiness. Andre the Giant, We Hardly Knew Ye. And Shem Powered, Today We Mourn a Stooge.
Meet Joe Blow, and give my remains to Broadway.
The verdict was mail fraud and leper in the backfield.
Last night's dinner.
Locker room towel fight, the blinding of Larry Driscoll.
Make out King of Montana and the Electric Gigolo.
Christmas Ape, and Christmas Ape Goes to Summer Camp. Son of Sanford and Son, and After Mannix.
David versus Super Goliath and Suddenly Last Supper.
Alice doesn't live anymore. And Mommy, what's wrong with that man's face? Welcome to Springfield Airport. And where's Nordstrom? Earwigs, ooh.